Now that we're alone, let's do what must be done. Wild West romantic suspense drama, love and desire. The sun was slowly going down behind the wide desert hills of Arizona. The sky was filled with soft orange and pink colors. A warm wind moved across the dry land, carrying dust and the quiet sound of the evening. Just outside a small frontier town stood an old wooden ranch. The place looked simple but peaceful. A few horses rested near the fence, and a lantern hung beside the porch, gently moving in the wind. On that porch stood Ethan Cole. Ethan was known in the town as a quiet cowboy. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept mostly to himself. People respected him, but very few truly knew him. His past was something he rarely talked about. That evening he leaned against a wooden railing, looking toward the long, empty road that stretched across the desert. It was a road that few travelers used after sunset, but Ethan was waiting. He checked the horizon again. The fading sunlight made the land look calm and endless. For a moment, it seemed like no one would come. Then he heard it, the soft sound of horse hooves touching the dry ground. Ethan straightened slightly and looked toward the road. In the distance, a single rider slowly appeared. The horse moved at a steady pace, and the rider sat calmly in saddle. As the rider came closer, the shape became clearer. It was Clara Bennett. Clara was not someone who belonged to the quiet desert life. She came from a busy town many miles away. She was known for her intelligence and strong spirit. People often said she had a way of understanding things before others did. Her dark coat moved gently in the wind as she guided her horse toward the ranch. Ethan watched quietly as she approached. When Clara finally reached the fence, she slowed the horse and carefully stepped down. She tied the horse to the wooden post and looked around the ranch for a moment, as if remembering something from long ago. Then her eyes met Ethan's. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The desert wind moved softly between them. Finally, Clara walked toward the porch. Her boots made light sounds against the wooden steps as she climbed up. Ethan nodded slightly. "Long ride," he said in a calm voice. Clara gave a small smile. "Yes," she replied. "Longer than I expected." For a moment, they both looked out toward the quiet desert again. The sky was darker now, and the first stars had begun to appear. A lantern near the door gave a soft golden light that warmed the porch. Clara rested her hands on the railing beside Ethan. "It's quieter here than I remember," she said. Ethan shrugged lightly. "The desert likes silence," he answered. "Not many people visit after dark." Clara looked at him for a moment, studying his calm expression. "That's exactly why I came now." Ethan turned his head slightly toward her. He already knew this meeting was not a simple visit. Clara reached into the small leather bag hanging from her shoulder. She held it carefully but did not open it yet. Instead, she looked out across the desert again. "Do you remember the last time we met here?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment. 3 years ago, he said. Clara nodded. "We didn't finish our conversation back then." The wind grew a little stronger, gently moving the lantern beside them. Ethan crossed his arms and leaned back against the railing. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like you came to finish it." Clara let out a slow breath. "Yes, I did." For a moment she looked unsure, something Ethan had never seen before. Clara was usually confident and direct, but tonight felt different. Finally she turned toward him and spoke softly. "Ethan, what I'm about to do could change many things." Ethan studied her face. He could see that whatever she carried in that bag was important, but he did not rush her. He simply waited. The desert night became deeper around them. The stars now filled the sky like tiny lights. Clara held the leather bag tightly. Then she said the words that had been on her mind the entire journey. "Now that we're alone." She paused for a second. Her voice was calm, but serious. "We must do what needs to be done." Ethan did not react immediately. He simply looked at her, trying to understand the meaning behind her words. A quiet moment passed between them. Then Ethan gave a small nod. "Well," he said gently, "I figured this night wasn't going to be ordinary." Clara allowed herself a small smile. And deep in the quiet desert, under the wide western sky, the real story was only beginning. The night had fully settled over the desert. The sky above the ranch was clear and filled with bright stars. The moon slowly rose over the distant hills, spreading a soft silver light across the quiet land. The old ranch porch was calm. The lantern near the door continued to glow warmly, lighting the wooden floor and the two people standing there, Ethan Cole and Clara Bennett. For a few moments after Clara spoke, neither of them said anything. The wind moved softly through the dry grass around the ranch. Ethan finally broke the silence. "So," he said calmly, "you rode all this way for something important." Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, very important." She placed a small leather bag on the wooden table beside the porch railing. Her fingers rested on it for a moment, as if she was thinking carefully about what to say next. Ethan watched her quietly. He had known Clara for years, and he could tell she was carrying more than just a bag. She was carrying worry, responsibility, and something else. Something heavy. Clara looked out toward the open desert again before speaking. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you ever feel like something big is about to happen, even when everything around you looks calm?" Ethan gave a small smile. "Out here in the desert," he said, "calm things usually hide the biggest stories." Clara looked at him again. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. Ethan always understood more than he showed. She slowly opened the leather bag. Inside was a bundle of folded papers. Ethan did not move closer. He simply waited. Clara carefully took the papers out and held them in her hands. The lantern light touched the edges of the pages. "These documents," she said, "hold information about some important people in the town." Ethan raised one eyebrow slightly. "Important in a good way?" he asked. "Or a complicated way?" Clara gave a quiet laugh. "Complicated." She placed the papers back on the table, but kept one hand on them. "For months I've been studying these records," she continued. "Business deals, land papers, agreements between people who control most of the town." Ethan leaned back against the railing. "And something about them doesn't feel right," he guessed. Clara nodded. "Exactly." She looked serious now. "These papers show that some people have been making unfair deals. Quiet deals. Deals that affect many families in the town." Ethan listened carefully. "But the problem," Clara added, "is that not everyone would be happy if this information became public." Ethan crossed his arms. "I can imagine." Clara looked down at the documents again. "I didn't know who I could trust," she admitted. The words hung in the air. Ethan did not look offended. Instead, he nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. "Trust isn't easy these days." Clara looked at him again. "But there was one person I kept thinking about." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess," he said lightly. "A quiet cowboy who spends too much time alone on a ranch." Clara smiled. "Yes, that one." The mood on the porch softened for a moment, but Clara soon became serious again. "I came here tonight because I needed someone who could look at these papers with clear eyes," she explained. Ethan stepped closer to the table and looked down at the documents. "Why me?" he asked. Clara thought for a moment. "Because you care about fairness," she said, "and because you never rush into decisions." Ethan studied the papers without touching them yet. "Seems like a lot of responsibility to ride across the desert for," he said. Clara rested her hands on the railing again. "The truth often asks people to travel far," she replied. For a moment they both looked at the wide open land around them. The desert was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Ethan finally picked up one of the papers and looked at it carefully. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Clara watched his reaction. "What do you think?" she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he placed the paper back on the table. "I think," he said slowly, "that these papers could change a lot of things if people saw them." Clara nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of." Ethan leaned on the table slightly. "So the real question is," he said, "what do you want to do with them?" Clara looked up at the stars. "I want the truth to be known," she said. Then she looked back at Ethan. "But I don't want to make the wrong move." Ethan thought quietly. The desert wind moved again, gently shaking the lantern. Finally he spoke. "Well," he said calmly, "if we're going to do something important, we should take our time and do it the right way." Clara looked relieved. "That's exactly why I came here." Ethan nodded. "Then it looks like this long night just got a little more interesting." The moonlight spread across the ranch as the two of them continued studying the papers together. And slowly, piece by piece, the hidden story inside those documents began to reveal itself. The night grew deeper around the ranch. The moon now stood high in the sky, spreading a soft white light across the desert. The wind had become cooler, and the quiet land felt almost still. On the porch of the ranch, Ethan Cole and Clara Bennett were still studying the papers spread across the wooden table. The lantern flickered gently as Ethan carefully read another document. Clara watched him with patient eyes. She had spent many weeks studying those papers, but she wanted Ethan to see everything himself. Finally, Ethan placed the page down and leaned back slightly. "These are not small matters," he said calmly. Clara nodded. "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The desert night seemed to listen to their silence. Ethan picked up another sheet of paper and studied the signatures at the bottom. "These agreements," he said slowly, "they give certain people control over large pieces of land near the town." Clara stepped closer to the table. "Yes, and those lands were once owned by families who lived there for generations." Ethan looked up. "What happened to those families?" Clara folded her arms. "They were convinced to sell their land cheaply. Some were told the land had little value. Others believed the town council would help them." Ethan shook his head gently. "And the council didn't help." "No," Clara said quietly. "Instead, some of the same people who made those promises later bought the land themselves." Ethan looked out across the desert for a moment. The land around them looked peaceful, but now it felt different. Hidden stories often live beneath quiet places. Clara picked up one of the papers. "This one," she said, "shows a large deal planned for next month." Ethan read the title at the top of the document. A railway company wanted to build a line across the valley. "That land is about to become very valuable," Ethan said. Clara nodded again. "And the people who bought it early will make a lot of money." Ethan placed the paper back on the table. "So the families who sold their land were never told about the railway." Clara sighed. "No, they were not." The lantern light moved softly across their faces. Ethan crossed his arms and thought carefully. "Do the people in town know about any of this?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Not yet." Ethan looked at the stack of papers. These documents could show the truth. Clara leaned against the railing of the porch. "That's why I brought them." Ethan studied her expression. "But something tells me that's not the only reason you came here," he said. Clara hesitated for a moment. Then she spoke honestly. "You're right." She looked down at the wooden floor before continuing. "I didn't just need help understanding the papers." Ethan waited quietly. Clara looked up again. "I needed someone I could trust." The words felt heavy but honest. Ethan gave a small, thoughtful nod. "That makes sense." Clara walked a few steps across the porch and looked out at the moonlit desert. "Back in town, everyone seems to have their own interests," she explained. "Business owners, council members, even some friends." Ethan joined her at the railing. "Sometimes the quiet places help people think clearly," he said. Clara smiled slightly. "That's exactly what I hoped." They stood there for a moment, watching the calm desert. Then Clara turned back to the table. "So now we know the truth," she said. "But knowing something and deciding what to do about it are two different things." Ethan walked back to the table and slowly gathered the papers into a neat stack. "You're right," he said. He looked at Clara again. "If these papers are shared the wrong way, it could cause confusion and anger." Clara nodded. "I don't want chaos," she said. "I only want fairness." Ethan rested one hand on the documents. "Then the next step is important." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What step?" Ethan smiled slightly. "We need to show the truth to the right people." Clara looked curious. "And who would those people be?" Ethan thought for a moment. "The families who lost their land," he said. "And maybe a few honest leaders in the town." Clara considered the idea. "That could work." Ethan nodded. "But it has to be done carefully." Clara looked relieved. "I'm glad I didn't come here alone." Ethan gave a quiet chuckle. "Out here, no one should face big decisions alone." The moon continued shining across the ranch as they prepared the papers. For the first time that night, Clara felt hopeful. The truth was no longer hidden in a bag, and together, they would begin to find the right way forward. The first light of morning slowly touched the desert. A soft golden glow spread across the wide land. The stars faded away one by one as the sun began to rise behind the distant hills. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the quiet promise of a new day. At the ranch, Ethan Cole was already awake. He stood beside the wooden fence, gently brushing one of the horses. The animal moved calmly, enjoying the peaceful morning. Behind him, the ranch house door slowly opened. Clara Bennett stepped outside. She had slept only a few hours, but her mind felt clearer than it had in many days. The long night of reading and talking had helped her understand what needed to be done. She walked down the porch steps and joined Ethan near the fence. "Morning," she said softly. Ethan looked up and smiled slightly. "Morning." For a moment they both watched the sunrise. The desert looked warm and endless under the growing light. Clara took a deep breath. "It's strange," she said. "Last night everything felt uncertain." Ethan nodded. "And now?" Clara looked toward the ranch house where the documents rested safely inside. "Now it feels like the path is clearer." Ethan leaned against the fence. "That's usually how good decisions work," he said. "You think about them carefully, then the answer slowly shows itself." Clara smiled. "I'm glad you think that way." After a moment, Ethan walked toward the small wooden table near the barn. On it sat the leather bag that carried the important papers. He picked it up and placed it gently in Clara's hands. "These belong to you," he said. Clara held the bag carefully. "They belong to the truth," she replied. Ethan gave a thoughtful nod. "So what's the plan?" Clara looked across the open land. "The families who lost their land deserve to know the full story," she said. "They should see these papers first." Ethan agreed. They trusted people who didn't treat them fairly. The truth should come back to them. Clara walked slowly along the fence, thinking carefully. "After that," she continued, "we'll bring the documents to the town meeting." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That meeting next week?" "Yes," Clara said. "That will take courage," Ethan said calmly. Clara smiled slightly. "I rode across half the desert to get here. I think I can walk into a town meeting." Ethan chuckled. "That's true." The two of them prepared the horses. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the land around the ranch. Soon they were ready to ride. Ethan mounted his horse while Clara carefully tied the leather bag to her saddle. Before leaving, Clara looked back at the quiet ranch. "This place helped me think clearly," she said. Ethan nodded. "The desert has a way of doing that." They began riding along the dusty road toward the town. The journey was calm and peaceful. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides, and the wind moved gently through the tall, dry grass. As they rode, Clara looked toward Ethan. "You know," she said, "when I first came here, I wasn't sure what would happen." Ethan glanced at her. "And now?" Clara smiled. "Now I'm glad I came." They continued riding until the small town appeared in the distance. Wooden buildings lined the main street, and people had already begun their morning work. The town looked normal and quiet, unaware that something important was about to happen. Ethan and Clara rode to a small farmhouse just outside the town. An older couple lived there, one of the families who had sold their land months earlier. Clara gently knocked on the door. A few moments later, the door opened. The couple welcomed them kindly. Inside the house, Clara carefully placed the documents on the table and explained everything they had discovered. At first, the couple listened with surprise. Then slowly, understanding filled their faces. The truth was finally being shared. Later that day, Ethan and Clara visited several other families. Each time, they explained the situation with honesty and patience. By evening, many people in the community understood what had happened, but instead of anger, something stronger grew in the town. Hope. Hope that fairness could return. Hope that the future could be better. As the sun began to set again, Ethan and Clara stood at the edge of the town street. Clara looked at him. "Looks like we did what needed to be done." Ethan smiled. "Looks like it." Clara looked toward the open road, leading back to ranch. "You know," she said, "this story started with one long ride across the desert." Ethan adjusted his hat. "And it might lead to many more journeys." Clara laughed softly. "Maybe." They stood quietly for a moment as the evening light filled the town. The truth had been shared. The future was beginning to change.